Let's join Thomas Reinfeldt with the Garden Doctor.
Welcome to the Garden Doctor, and just a reminder, this is our second to last episode for the spring season edition of the Garden Doctor. So if you have questions about things, maybe not for the month of May, but maybe June, July, August, this would be the time right now. Get those questions in. Our text line always open, 887-9595. You can always call as well, 885-4446. And with Mother's Day right around the corner, let's open it up. Dick, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, we're ready and set for Mother's Day. We've got lots and lots of variety of hanging baskets. If you want something of real color for her, or we have bud and bloom roses too. You know, why buy her a dozen cut roses when they'll only last a week? You know, get her a bud and bloom rose that will last all summer long, and if taken care of properly, will last for a long time.
And if you are watching on Daily Dodge TV, you can see this is the button bloom rose you mentioned here?
Yeah, bud and bloom. It's, it's in bud and ready to bloom. So I would say probably within a week to 10 days, that flower is going to be wide open and you'll have lots of color. And then when you cut them back and get a new set of growth, you get another set of blooms. And we've got the hybrid teas, grandifloras, floribundas, which are the ones that you use for cut flowers. And then we have the hardy knockout roses, plus a lot of other hardy roses that you can put in, and they need minimal winter protection, where the hybrid teas and the grandifloras, you need to cover them for the winter. And we've done videos on this so that if you're at all question about it, you just go to the Garden Doctor channel and look up the rose care video, and it will tell you exactly what you have to do to take those roses through the winter, and hopefully they'll be alive in the springtime and will start growing. I've uncovered my roses now and fertilized them good so we get them started growing, and within a couple of weeks there should be some flowers there. But these ones that I brought along, we potted those up in February and had them in a overwintering greenhouse where we didn't put a lot of additional heat into the greenhouse, so that they came along kind of naturally, and we may have missed the bloom part of it by a week or so, but now you plant it and water it and get it established, and you'll have flowers all summer long.
So once these start blooming, it will pretty much go all summer. Maintenance for this is pretty easy?
They're heavy feeders. They like to be fertilized, and you fertilize roses all through the summer, and then about the 1st of August, you stop fertilizing them, because although roses are beautiful, they sometimes forget that it's winter is coming if you over-fertilize them, over-water them, and then they get to the point where it's winter time and they're not ready for it. So about the first part of August, you stop fertilizing them. 1st of September, you stop cutting the flowers, because when you prune a plant, it tends to grow. So when you're taking the flowers off, or it'll put it into a new flush of growth, and will reverse the dormancy part of it. And so, after the 1st of September, you kind of let them go dormant naturally. You also want to watch to make sure that the disease of roses, which is black spot, is not overtaking the plant, because if you get a lot of black spot on roses, it tends to defoliate early, and that they need those leaves to get the winter hardiness that they need. And so there are fungicides that you can treat the plant with to keep those diseases at bay, but no fertilization after the 1st of August, and very little pruning and that sort of stuff after the 1st of September. And the roses will go through the knockout roses and the hardy roses. I had a knockout rose. I think I had one of the original knockout roses in my yard in the house that I lived in prior to the one I'm in now, and I think I had it for like 25 years before it finally succumbed. I was kind of sorry to see it go, because it's a really The hardy roses are mainly for color in the landscape. They're not for cut flowers because they get lots of flowers and then they bloom every time they get a new flush of growth. And so when when the flowers have gone past and the petals have dropped, then you want to trim them back so that you get a new flush of growth. But then, like I said, after the 1st of August, you don't want to do that anymore. You want to let the plant go dormant naturally.
I didn't realize how much roses had in common with first-year college students, because
Yeah.
they're partying all the time, then they realize it's the morning of finals and they've done no studying.
Yes,
So
I guess that's kind of true.
if you have a question for the Garden Doctor, 887-9595 is our talk text line, or 885-4446. And as you mentioned with the black spot on roses, it seems like it does pretty well. So it can take a little bit of black spot, but it's not the total death of the plant.
Yeah, black spot is something that defoliates the plant. It drops the leaves prematurely if it gets too many of the lesions on a leaf. So when you see the yellowing, that's the first sign that they're starting to get the disease, and then you should use a fungicide on them a couple times to make sure that they keep those leaves long enough to get hardiness. Yeah, and so, we've got that. We've got the bare root room is open, and we've got lots of bare root to sell, and bare root is really easy. People come in and they wonder if those plants that look with no leaves on them and things like that are even going to grow, but they do. They grow very, very nicely. The advantage to bare root is that they're less expensive than the potted trees, and you're planting them in the soil that they're going to be growing in so that they do well. With the potted plants, sometimes the roots, especially if the pot is root bound, they tend to keep circling the wagons, and 20 years down the road, you find that the plant is starting to decline. So I prefer bare root, and we have all kinds of perennials too. They're out, and the tomatoes and peppers and all the vegetable garden things that you need for your garden are ready to go. Almost time to get them out. If you are going to protect them if you get a cold spell, you can plant them out right now. Otherwise, just take them out during the day and bring them in at night so that they harden off before you plant. So, yeah, we've got a lot of things. I still get onions, so we still have potatoes available. So, we've got everything. Time to get over and get your garden and your landscape up to par.
Dick Zondag, the Garden Doctor at Jung's Garden Center. You can find him at 7 different locations, including Randolph. Well, we need to discuss your latest video on the Garden Doctor YouTube channel and potatoes. But first, we have a call on the line. Let's go there and say, good morning. What's your question for Dick Zondag, the Garden Doctor?
Yeah, I bought a fern peony from you a few years ago, and it's getting pretty thick. And I was wondering when the best time is to separate that.
Okay, you're probably a little past the time when you can do it in the springtime. The best time for dividing peonies is in the fall, usually around the 1st of October after the eyes are formed. And it's very simple to do it. You just take a spade shovel and dig right down in the middle of the clump and dig half of it out. Take the soil off, and then you can actually divide that half if you've got a large clump. You want to have at least 3 eyes, and the eyes are those little knobs that are sort of pinkish color, and you want to have at least 3 of those, and then you want to plant them. And peonies, they have 2 requirements to flower. If you plant them too deep, they're not going to flower, and the depth should be, the eyes should be maybe an inch below the surface of the soil. You don't want to plant them much deeper than that. And you want to have them in full sunlight because they are a plant that likes to have a lot of sunlight. If you do that, they grow very well, and they flower and bloom, and they're really pretty in the early summer.
And then I also have some ferns, and they're starting to spread into my other flowers. When's the best time to replant them and move them?
Yeah, right now.
Right now?
Yeah, you can, ferns are pretty hard to kill, actually, and so right now is a good time to dig them and transplant them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. 885-4446 is the number for the Garden Doctor. So I think I was the very first viewer of your potato video this
Okay.
morning. You were talking a little bit about that last week. 4 different types or 4 different ways to plant potatoes.
Oh, there's actually hundreds of different ways to
well,
plant
that
potatoes.
would have been like a 3-hour-long video.
I know. What I did this year is I've got potatoes growing in 5-gallon pails.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was I used determinate varieties, which means that the potatoes are sort of grow on a horizontal plane. They don't go up and down the whole stem of the plant. And so what I did was I put about 6 inches of compost on the bottom, put potatoes at 6 and 12, and then I put another 6 or 8 inches, and then I put 2 of them at 3 and 9. And they did that about 2 weeks ago, and they're already peeking through the
Wow.
top of the pail. And you got to drill a hole in the bottom, or several holes in the bottom, so that the excess water drains out. But I'm gonna take them out of the greenhouse now and put them in my yard where I can water them. Probably put them on a 2x4 structure and water and fertilize them to get them growing well. And then I also planted some in a cardboard box. Cardboard box is already deteriorating, so I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to get that out to the garden. But then I also did some potatoes where I planted them in the ground, about 6 or 8 inches deep in the ground. And then I also planted some right on the surface of the soil, and then I covered them with straw that I had covered my strawberries with.
Okay.
And so what happens there is the shoots will go through the straw and get up to the sunlight. And again, the potatoes grow in one plane. And by keeping them covered from the light, later on in the summer, they'll form potatoes, and we're going to have a good harvest of potatoes.
Because that can be the death for potatoes. If they get exposure to that sunlight, they turn green, they're inedible at that time.
It's a stem, it's a tuber, which is a piece of stem tissue because it has eyes on it that can grow. And if you let them get exposed to sunlight, they turn green. And the green part of the potato is inedible. It's actually poisonous. It has oxalic acid, which you don't really want to eat. So it's very important that you keep the soil mounded up around the potatoes as they grow in height. You hill them up, and the hilling is just a matter of keeping the soil or whatever you're using to cover the stems so that the sunlight can't get to them.
So you want to keep mounding as they build up. How deep do you want to be planting your potatoes?
If you're planting them in the soil and you want to keep them in the soil, I would say 6 to 8 inches deep, and then cover them with about 3 or 4 inches of soil, just enough so that they start growing. And then as they come up and they grow more, you just keep pulling more of the soil back around them until you hill them up. You can hill them up by 8 to 12 inches, and then as soon as the potatoes are flowering, you can start checking to see if there are some small potatoes there. But if you really want to get the big potatoes, you have to wait until the vines start dying. That means that the potatoes are mature, and that's when you can dig them up and store them for the winter. And with potatoes, what you want to do is you want to store them in a dark area that's warm to start with, because that way the skin of the potato toughens up, and that way they'll store longer. If you just put them in a bag and put them in a cool area, the skin is very thin, and they don't store very well.
So I realize my dad and I were planting potatoes this weekend. I don't think I was close to 6 inches underneath, so maybe I need to be putting some straw on top of them.
Well, you can just keep mounding the soil up higher.
Just keep building it up around them.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Just keep mounding the soil up so that you get you have a hill of soil, so that it's not just level with the ground. You actually build a hill up, and that's fine.
But the hay method is that's mulching essentially.
Yep.
So we're blocking out some of the other growth or competition from weeds, but
Right.
we're also preserving some of that moisture, keeping that in the soil,
Right.
and then shading the potatoes at the same time.
Right, and the potatoes will go right in the straw.
So it seems like there's only benefits to adding hay to your
Straw.
potatoes. Straw.
Difference between
Because-
straw and hay.
That's right.
Hay is,
hay's a green.
hay is green and straw is a brown.
That's right, okay. And
But then, you know, you can keep mounding up the straw too, because I've got extra straw there. I just want to get the leaves up and green above the straw, and then I'll keep putting more straw around them too. And then keep them watered. You want to fertilize them with a little bit more nitrogen to get them to grow now, and then back off the nitrogen probably the end of July, when the potatoes are starting to form.
So we mentioned that you have a great selection of compost at Jung's Garden Center in Randolph. You have the mushroom compost, the manure. You also have straw there then as well?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay.
do. Yeah.
So pretty much anything that someone would need compost mulch-wise.
Yep, we have it.
I have to say, since our last talk, I've started to work on the compost a little bit more and trying to layer the greens. And I'm realizing, hey, all these dandelions that are growing, they're all greens.
Yeah, they
Perfect.
are.
Let's just add them to the compost, add some browns on there.
As long as they're not in seed.
As long as they're not in seed.
Yeah,
So
so
one of
if you
those
got the
white
little
caps.
puffy white stuff,
Okay.
you want to take them off, because that seed can sprout into more dandelions.
Yeah.
So you want to get them while they're still yellow, and then they're not going to make viable seed, and then compost that, yeah. And run them through your lawnmower, you know, get them a little bit smaller pieces, and yeah, they work really good for compost. But you got to make sure, the two things you don't want to use in a compost pile is anything that's in seed. So if your weeds are seeding, you don't want to use them, because then the seed is very inert and will not, you know, it'll just germinate when you spread it on your garden, and then you'll have dandelions like you wouldn't believe. And then the other thing you don't use in a compost pile is any kind of fat or things that you generate from meat. Yeah, that you don't want to do that, because that attracts rodents, and it doesn't compost very easily. So, yeah.
The following is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBV, ESPN, nor Good Karma Brands. As mentioned, I suppose if someone's picking up flowers from Jung's, you might have that cardboard flat, and you can tear that up and use that as a base layer for starting a small compost pile.
Well, the flowers and things come in plastic cells, and so that
Oh, those,
plastic
yeah.
does not compost.
But the cardboard flats would.
Well, the cardboard boxes that you put the
Yeah,
flats in.
those
yeah,
might
sure.
work.
Any
Right,
kind of,
right, yeah.
Any kind of cardboard, you know, you can use for browns, or if you're making a pathway, putting cardboard down and then putting something on top of it will keep the weeds from growing through it. You know, that cardboard is, a lot of it's used for browns, but, you know, putting a layer of cardboard down under a raised bed or under a pathway when you're putting compost on top of it, or bark, makes a barrier for the weeds or the grass. If you're covering grass, it'll kill the grass before it can make it through the cardboard. So cardboard is very useful in the garden.
One of the shorts that you have on YouTube, and by the way, the production quality of your videos is really well done, by the way. You have a great team behind you. But I think we mentioned it last week, planting radishes alongside your carrots, just providing a marker of letting us know where the carrots are in the garden?
Actually, I planted some carrots and lettuce on Friday, and I put radishes in every row, and it was in the raised bed, so I planted the rows 4 inches apart, you know, just like a hand's length apart, and I put, you know, just a few radishes in with each of the carrots, and the radishes are already peeking through, and so they
Oh.
come up very, very fast, and then the radishes when the radishes are ready to be eaten, you pull them out, and then the greens of the carrots are there, and they kind of grow, and I used seed tapes on some of them, and I planted raw seed on some of them, and so we're going to make videos on, you know, how you thin carrots too, so that you get the nice straight roots, and they're not too crowded. So
I might be mistaken on this. I probably am, but carrots would be something we'd want to use seed tape and plant directly into the garden. That's not something we want to start as seedlings and then transplant, is it?
no, you don't want to transplant them. They come very easily, but the the advantage to the seed tapes is that the seeds are pretty much spaced out the distance that they should be apart, so you don't have to do much thinning. And the other problem with raw carrot seed is that it's very fine. It was kind of windy that day, and so I had to be really careful because that seed would almost blow right out of your hand. And so yeah, the other problem with seeding a raw seed is that some of it gets deeper than others, and so the germination is very ununiform. And with seed tapes, the germination is just almost uniform. So for small seeds, the seed tape really works well.
885-4446. If you have a question for Dick Zondag, the garden doctor from Jung's Garden Center, we can also take your text as well, 887-9595. Well, as this is our second to last episode, we probably need to be a little aware of how to treat our tomatoes later on in the season, but I want to talk right now about rhubarb.
Okay.
We were lucky enough to receive some recipes from the old idea exchange from our late listener Dorothy Lindy, and a lot of recipes about rhubarb. And we're right in that rhubarb season right now.
Yeah, we had a potluck yesterday, and there were 3 rhubarb desserts on
Ooh.
the table. Yeah, that was really very tempting to park there.
So I pretty much for anyone except for Wade Bates, who, as we realize, has no idea what he's doing with rhubarb, when can we harvest rhubarb, and how should we pull those stems?
Yeah, you can harvest rhubarb from the time it comes up until probably the middle of the summer. And the way you do it is you just take the leaves that are closest to the ground and pull them, and they should come right off. And rhubarb is a heavy feeder, so you want to fertilize it. If it starts getting flower stalks, it means that it needs to be divided. And dividing rhubarb should usually be done in the fall, but you can do it probably past the time when you should be dividing rhubarb now. But you do the same thing as you did with a lot of other perennials. You just stick a shovel in the ground to cut about half of the clump out, and then leave half of it in the ground and fertilize it. And so if the stalks are getting thinner and spindly, or if you're seeing a lot of flower stalks coming up, it's time to divide it. And I would say every 3 or 4 years you should divide rhubarb, because it tends to be a weed to itself, and it grows very rapidly. It's a heavy feeder. You like to feed it, and we actually freeze a lot of rhubarb because we like rhubarb all year long. So
Can you divide a plant that you have harvested from, like right after you harvest
sure.
from it? You can
Yeah.
divide it
yeah.
and then wait a year?
No, when the stalks are big enough, you can start taking them. But you want, if you're doing it in the springtime, you want to divide it before much has happened. In other words, if the leaves are unfurled, it's probably too late to divide it, although you probably couldn't get away with it. But the best time is when it's dormant in the fall or very early spring before the leaves start to expand.
885-4446 is our number if you have a question for Dick Zondag, the gardening doctor. Let's go back to the phones and say good morning, caller. What is your question?
Hello.
Good
Yes.
morning.
My question is onions.
Okay.
My neighbor raises beautiful onions. They're about the size of baseballs,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even larger.
Yep.
Mine always seem to be not much bigger than my thumb.
Okay.
And am I planting them too deep, or am I not planting them early enough, or what am I doing wrong?
you
Maybe what
actually-
variety.
Yeah, onions could have been planted a month ago already. They do they can stand some cold weather, but the big thing that you want to do is you want to fertilize them with a high nitrogen fertilizer right now, because that gets the leaves growing. And the more leaves you have, the bigger the bulb is going to be. So plant them in early to maybe the first or second week in April, although this year it was pretty cold to do that. And then you want to fertilize them immediately with a fertilizer. The first number is reasonably high. Then in July and August, they will start forming the onions. That's when you back off the nitrogen. I would say I fertilize my onions 3 or 4 times during the summer. They have a very poor root system. The root system doesn't go very far, and so keeping weeds away from the onions, watering them when it gets hot and dry, and then fertilizing them properly will give you nice-sized onions. The other
How
thing,
deep should I plant them?
how deep? You want them so that they're maybe an inch in the soil,
Okay.
because they'll grow up above. The other thing you should do is walk over to your neighbor and visit with him and ask him what he's doing, because, you know, that's a great way to meet your neighbor, to, you know, correspond with your neighbor, and if he's a good gardener, you can learn from him.
Well, he gives me onions every year, and it's like, man, I wish I could grow onions like
Well,
that.
you can. You can grow them like that. The other thing you want to do is compost in your garden so that your garden has good nutrient holding capacity, good texture, because onions are not heavy competers. The other thing I've seen people do on YouTube is they've pulled the dirt from around the onions when they start to form the bulbs, but I've never done that. The onions that seem to do okay without doing that, but it's called spooning, and some people do that, you know, when the onion starts to form, they'll pull the soil back from around the bulb so the bulb can expand easier. But the big secret is high nitrogen in the early, you know, plant them early, give them a lot of food so that they have the greens grow really well. And then when they start to bulb up in late July, well, in late July and August, when they start to bulb up, back off on the nitrogen, because then you don't want the leaves to grow anymore. You want the energy of the plant to go into making nice-sized bulbs.
Thank you.
And thanks for calling.
That was a great question. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. 885-4446. And what a great point, too. Gardening is much more than just us being playing in the dirt. It's bringing people together.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I always tell people that play in the dirt, that get dirt under their fingernails, are the best people in the world. I love talking gardening. You know, I love planting things and seeing things grow. I think you get a little lift out of taking those vegetables from your garden and eating them. We had our first cutting of asparagus last night. And
Wow.
I hope we'll get that on the table tonight, you know. But, you know, when you're growing things and they're doing well for you, it really gives you a little bit of a lift. Even me, I mean, I'm always learning. I mean, gardening and growing plants and things like that, you're always learning new things. With doing all the videos that I'm doing now, I'm also watching YouTube for hints on what other people are telling people to do, and I kind of sift through those and pick out the best things. But there are some really good people out there teaching gardening, and there are also some that don't know what they're talking about. But yeah,
Well, thankfully, that's not the case here. If you have a question for Dick Zondag,
Yeah, I hope
the
not.
always humble garden doctor, 885-4446 is our number. Let's go back to the phones and say good morning. What is your question today?
Good morning. I was given a whole bunch of seeds last year for winter onions, and we
Okay.
planted them pretty thick in a raised garden, like in
Okay.
a big water tank. And what do I do with them all? Do I pull some out and leave them, or
yeah,
I never did that before.
yeah. If they're coming up really, really thick, yeah, you do have to thin them out because they will not form large bulbs if they're crowded. Now, I planted a lot of onions in my raised bed garden. I planted them about 4 inches apart. The rows 4 inches apart and the plants 4 inches apart. And that's about the closest that you should go, because otherwise they're not going to have room to form the bulbs, and they're going to be competing against each other for whatever's there. So if they're coming up thick, you want to thin them out. You can eat them for green onions. Onion sets are another thing that we sell a lot of, and those are mainly for green onions. You can plant them really, really close together and then thin them out for green onions. And if you have a few left, they're a very sharp onion. They have a very lot of flavor to them, but they store very well. They're not very sweet, so they're the ones that are going to store the best. But most people want to have those baseball or softball size onions, and to do that, you have to follow the fertilization program so that they get nitrogen, the high nitrogen. You just take a tin can and you put a band of fertilizer right next to where the onions are and work it into the soil and water it in, and they'll respond to it.
So these winter onions will get big bulbs if you pull a bunch of them out then?
Winter onions do not get to be big bulbs. They mainly divide. They'll get to be like the size of leeks. When you do leeks, you get about an inch and a half or 2 inches in diameter. That's as big as the winter onions will be, but then they multiply very rapidly, and they are hardy, so you can keep them, you can divide them and plant them out again, but they work really good in soups and hot dishes and things like that.
Well, we pulled them a whole bunch out, and I cleaned them, and they're like the green onions, which you would get like in a store or something like that.
Right.
So that's mostly what they're for then.
Yes, and then you leave enough of them there so they divide, and then you pull them up and you divide them. You plant them about 4 or 5 inches apart, and then they'll grow again.
Okay, thank you much.
Thank you so much for that question. And a great reminder that the Garden Doctor YouTube channel actually has a phenomenal video about onions and how to grow and what sort of food they may need.
Right. We did and we'll be following up, with onions that are in my raised bed garden. What we want to do ultimately is follow things through the whole life cycle. The starting of the seed, the planting. When you plant them out, what you do when you plant them out, and then what you do over the summertime, and you watch them grow, and then when you harvest them in the fall, and then what you do with them to keep them going. We're probably going to do one on glads next week. We did the video on digging them last fall, and now we've got them in storage, and they're coming out of storage, and we'll be planting them very soon. And so we want to have videos on most of the products that we sell, so when people want to see how to do it, or if they don't want to read, they can go to the YouTube and look it up.
Absolutely. Well, just like the gardening season in Wisconsin, our time is very quickly coming to an end, and we have a couple text questions to get to. But if you have a question, please, 887-9595, or give us a call, 885-4446. The first question that came through here, Dick, is a question about when to fertilize strawberries and potatoes planted in a pail.
Well, you use a compost that has quite a bit of nutrients in it, but I fertilize them right away, because what you want to do is get them growing, with potatoes especially. With strawberries, I've actually fertilized. I have strawberries growing in my backyard, and I fertilized them last week just before the rain came, and they're really responding very nicely to it. In fact, I've got strawberries in blossom now, and I've got to watch out so that if it's going to get really cold, I'm going to have to cover them with a roll cover or something to keep those blossoms from growing. But again, we did another video on different methods of overwintering strawberries, and if you do use a roll cover, and if you don't know what a roll cover is, just watch the video. But the roll cover, when we uncovered them, they were just as green as grass, because the roll cover let sunlight through, and so the leaves stayed very, very nicely over winter, where the ones that were covered with straw, which is the normal way of doing it, were kind of yellow. And that's when you want to take the straw off, is when they start pushing the straw away, and you can uncover them and you'll see that there's some yellow under there. But using straw will hold them back until the danger of frost is gone too. So we did it both ways, and so we'll have some nice early, probably 4 to 5 weeks, we'll have strawberries on some of them, and then the others that were covered with straw will probably be 2 weeks later than that. So there's different ways to manipulate things so that they do what you want them to do.
Well, that's excellent. I managed to plant some strawberry plants in the garden this weekend alongside the early girls that you brought in. And then I realized that my puppy also likes strawberries, so he promptly took one of the plants out of the garden. So,
We have the same problem. We have a Thai dog that my daughter brought back from Thailand, and she jumped up in the raised bed garden, was digging some of the garlic and the onions up, which I had to shoo her out and replant. But, they're worth it. They are worth it.
They are
Yeah,
indeed.
They are.
Well, we got another text on the line here, Dick, about any tips on growing grapes. Somebody's looking to buy a property that has some grapevines on it, and they would love to see them flourish.
Okay, with grapes, the rule of thumb is that you want to keep the grape clusters as close to the root system as possible. And so what you want to do is develop a trunk where the new growth comes out of that trunk, and you train that on a wire, and that's where the stems that grew last summer are the ones that are going to produce the grapes this summer. And at the same time, you'll get new growth coming out of that trunk. And then when the grapes are harvested, that fruiting wood is removed, and some of the new growth that was emanating from that trunk will be the fruiting stems for next year. The problem with just letting them grow is that each year they get a year's growth farther away from the root system, and so you have to develop a system of keeping the new growth that's fruiting as close to the root system as possible. And hard to explain it over the radio, but if they want to, they can come in, and we have pamphlets on growing grapes and things like that.
Excellent.
So, we have, if they can read, probably another video that I should do, but that one will be when I get some of the other more necessary videos done.
Absolutely.
So anyway, but I mean, that brings up the bare root too. We've got a lot of bare root, and it's really time to get that in the ground. And you just soak the roots for 24 hours with root stimulator in it, stick it in the ground. And like I said at the beginning, they don't look like much when you buy them, but when they're in the ground, they start growing. Keep them watered for a while, and away they go. I mean, these roses that we have in front of you were bare root about 2 months ago, and look at them now.
They are gorgeous. Dick Zondag, the garden doctor from Jung's Garden Center. Dick, I realized when you were talking about onions, which I also planted this weekend, I do not have a high nitrogen fertilizer that I feel comfortable using, so I probably need to stop over at Jung's and also pick up some straw and some more compost because I used all that up. What are your hours during the week?
Yeah, the hours are 8 to 5 Monday through Friday in Randolph, 8 to 4 on Saturday, and we're not open on Sunday. The other stores, which are the 3 stores in the Madison area, Stoughton, Appleton, and Stevens Point, 9 to 6 Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 on Saturday, and 10 to 3 on Sunday.
Now, you have like over a dozen varieties of compost, bagged compost, and in the parking lot at Jung's, at least in the Randolph location. Do you have a favorite type of bagged compost? Are they all kind of treated the same?
Well, if you're looking for something with a little more nitrogen in it, then you want to use an animal compost, like a manure or chicken manure or something like that. If you're just looking for something that improves the soil texture, then the leaf compost, some of the others. When you do a raised bed garden, in the square foot gardening method, what they do is they use a mixture of compost. So when you're making your soil mix, it's a third peat moss by volume. You fluff up the compressed peat moss, and you put a wheelbarrow of compost of peat moss, then a wheelbarrow load of vermiculite or perlite, and then a wheelbarrow full of mixed compost. So you'd put the leaf, the chicken, the cow, any kind of compost, or even the compost that you make yourself, in that wheelbarrow, and so you add that to it, and that makes a beautiful raised bed garden mix. And if you don't want to do that, we have it bagged also, so you can buy ready-to-use raised bed garden mix in a bag. Probably a little expensive to do a whole raised bed garden with it, but that also is excellent for houseplants or for growing seedlings on after you've started them. So, yeah.
Well, I did tease that we would be talking about tomatoes and how to prepare them, and maybe we might have to delay that until next week, our last episode of the spring season, because we just had a question come in. Someone has 4 apples in their backyard, 2 dwarf, and they're blossoming. The other 2 are standard, but they're about 5 years old, and they have no blossoms.
Yeah.
Do they take longer to produce?
Yes, they do. Standard apples take about 2 or 3 years longer to mature than dwarfs. I don't know if it's the stress of the graft or what makes it, but dwarf, if you use a dwarfing rootstock or a semi-dwarfing rootstock, one of the advantages is that they do fruit 2 to 3 years earlier than the standard. And if they don't get fruit on them, or they don't get flowers on them and they're 3 or 4 years old, use the old baseball or carpet knife trick that I tell people about, you know, where you bruise the
The
bark a little
jet-proof
bit.
baseball bat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or you beat the bark with a bat or a pipe or something. That what that does is it bruises the connective tissue a little bit and puts the plant under stress, and that stress causes it to go from a juvenile kid-type plant to an adult flowering plant.
Well, in our last couple minutes, we have one real quick question coming through. Can we plant rhubarb and asparagus in raised beds or containers?
I don't see any reason why, but why you can't. I think you could probably do that, but in the ground, it performs really, really well too. I don't have it in my raised bed, but I might try some asparagus in it, see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, you can do it, and it will flourish, but I don't see the reason to do it.
Dick Zondag, the garden doctor from Jung's Garden Center. Check out the Garden Doctor YouTube channel. Lots of great videos up there. We've got one more episode on air next week.
Right. Yep. And then we'll be done for the summer. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you-
No, we've enjoyed it. Get a lot of ideas on different things, and yeah, I think it's well worth doing for us.
It's always the highlight of my Wednesday. So thanks a lot, Dick, and we'll speak again next week and taking your questions, same time, same place. This is 95.3 WBEV.
Sunshine, blizzards down.